Bonjour et bienvenue sur Qu'est-ce que le trans?
Good afternoon, everyone.
You were not expecting that.
Oui. Yes.
Yes, hello, yes, welcome to What the Trans. This is us. It is Alex and I. How you doing, honey?
I'm doing all right. It's been another couple weeks, and then news comes up again, and everyone's like, But yeah, it's been pretty good. I would say I've done stuff, but it's mainly been playing Minecraft. So I switched out game server providers. So if you're part of Shockbyte, they're rubbish. Do not buy them. That's James, my friend. I made that mention. There we go. Anyway, but yeah, I've sort of been fairly quiet.
Just while we're here, there is no Flint this evening, / this morning, depending on when you're listening to this. But we don't have Flint because life stuff has once again got in the way. It happens, no big deal. So you've just got Alex and I today. I am fine. I am jolly tired today, because I've been doing something fun, something interesting, something that involved me interviewing several people at the behest of a charity. And so I've been up way earlier than I normally would be up, and I've not had a nap during the day either. So I am running on fumes right now. But more to be revealed on that. That's going to be out generally in the world in January. So do keep a lookout for that. It's, with some good conversations, some good talking. And yeah, it was tremendous fun.
A good mysterious charity. Let's say LGB Alliance for now, shall we? As the
How dare you? Nothing too crazy interesting to mention.
An action-packed week at What the Trans.
And yeah, definitely so. Neither of us can think of anything particularly interesting we've done. That's how cool our lives are, listener.
Yeah, and speaking of action, I think we have a certain segment, don't we?
Before we step into that particular ginnel, it's worth mentioning that we're doing some awards this year, aren't we?
Yes, award show. You've probably mentioned me blathering on about it last week. But we've now got the What the Trans Awards has now got its voting opened.
Mm-hmm.
It's already a massive 200 responses already. It's absolutely just gone mad in the first couple of hours. And the form is still open right now. It will be open till the 18th of December. And just go out and vote. We've got so many cool categories. Activist of the Year.
Journalist
of the Year. Cracked Egg of the Year. And even some other ones like Villain of the Year.
Yes, which we've been having tremendous fun seeing all the various ne'er-do-wells jostling for position since the announcement went out.
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Just as I was eating my delicious woke sandwich, what do you like to top your woke sandwich with, Alex?
I'm kind of boring with my sandwiches because this was part of the Daily Mail, wasn't it? There was a whole...
There was. Apparently sandwiches are woke now.
Yeah, because... yeah, they mentioned young people in Britain were abandoning standard toppings of their sandwiches and going for mustard and ham or something like that, but I don't...
ham and mustard is a pretty standard sandwich topping, I think. I wouldn't have said there's anything particularly woke about that, unless you're using Dijon mustard, which, that's a little bit too French for the Daily Mail, I'm sure.
No, to be fair, I'm more of a seeded mustard kind of gal.
Ooh, whole grain.
Grain.
You dirty bitch. So my parents have actually been to Dijon in France, and they went into a... just a shop like a supermarket. Not like a supermarket, it was a supermarket. And they had an entire aisle of this supermarket was just mustard.
Just mustard? Really?
Just mustard. Justed. Yeah, definitely. They showed me a photo, and there's so many different varieties of the stuff. I'm guessing there's lots of cool little pop-ups making justed small batch mustard or some shit in Dijon, but yeah. So my my favourite woke sandwich is lettuce, gherkin, bacon and tomato, which is of course LGBT. That's how you do a woke sandwich, the Daily Mail. You've got to think about the acronym as well. Anyway, back to the action, as it were. Let's get a piece of the action. Yes, it's Action Alley.
Yeah, so, of course, when it comes to things that are coming up, so far we haven't had any new announcements on protests coming up, but if you're organising something that's happening after the 16th of December, get in touch, because that'll be when the next episode releases. But we also have some open letters as well, so we have an open letter from League Group Football v Homophobia to ask the FA to continue being inclusive towards trans people. So if you want to sign that kind of thing, we're going to link that in the description as well for you to fill that out.
Alongside this, it seems that Trans Pride Brighton are now looking to recruit more volunteers. So roles like digital marketers, project management, various other roles, which you can see on their website. So if you're up for it, we're going to link Sarah Savage's post in our description.
Yeah, and I think Ruth Pierce has been busy because she's appearing in multiple times in here as well, because coming up next is also a fundraiser by Ruth, a project aiming to get affordable electrolysis to trans folk given the extortionate prices other clinics charge. So if you want to help out with that, it's so close to its goal, we're going to link that in the description as well.
So many links in the description. There's also a call out for ace and asexual identifying folk to help take part in a research study looking at how representation impacts ace communities. You have to be based in the UK for that one, but again, link is down in the whatchamacallit.
Alongside that, I just want to add extra reminders about the fact that the EHRC consultation is still open about this public sector duty, so if you want to contribute, it'll be closing in January.
And just another reminder for the Transactual See Us, Hear Us campaign. That's still going on, and they're still very much interested in getting people to speak to their local MPs, preferably in person. So if you can find a way to get in front of your MP at a constituency surgery or another event, let Transactual know that you've done that, tag them in the post, put it on social media. So that's some action you can take. Obviously we're heading into Christmas, so things are kind of winding down a little bit, but not entirely, as Alex mentioned we will discuss later.
We've also been fairly busy writing up articles as well, and including Viridian. So for a little bit of shameless promo, Viridian, our fantastic Japanese correspondent, has written a brilliant article about the recent High Court decisions finding Japan's approach to marriage equality unconstitutional. This is after 3 couples have had their cases heard and how it affects the current landscape. So we don't want to go through the whole thing, but do check it out. It's a hell of a read.
It certainly is. And with that, let's crack on with the main thrust of our show, as ever, which is, of course, it's the news.
Not the news. And on that topic, it's about the terms of reference for the review scope of adult gender dysphoria clinics and key lines of inquiry for the review into adult trans healthcare, as they were published on the NHS website on November 14th. There's not a great deal to say about them right now, but it all seems fairly above board, and it makes a number of potentially hopeful noises. It's sterile enough that both trans people and the anti-trans lot can read anything they want into it. Obviously, announcing an overly hostile intent towards trans people at this stage isn't going to happen, even if that is the ultimate goal. I'm not going to spend much time quoting from it because it's deliberately a very dry document. It shows a rough plan for the levy review and the key lines of inquiry, or CLOEs. It works in 3 basic sections: what the review will examine, what it will identify, and what it will inform. So for what it will examine, we have things like the operating procedures in each commissioned GDC service and challenges to the delivery of the GDC service. For what it will identify, we've got areas of improvement and what support should be made available. And for what it will inform, we have things like action plans to improve GDC service quality as needed and a longer term quality improvement approach. But a phrase we think is going to be doing a lot of work is that the review will consider the safety and effectiveness of the GDC services, because who is going to define those parameters for the effectiveness, and who do they plan to ask? A steering group of cis people or some actual service users. I think we can and should raise hell that the review should speak to trans people, which seems like a basic step, but Cass more or less managed to miss it. And by trans people, I don't mean just speak to detransitioners like Kira Bell, but a larger cohort of people who have actually been helped by the service. That's what we need to agitate for, that these key stakeholders actually include us.
Yeah. So, did you catch this one in the news? Because it wasn't very widely published.
No, there was fuck all about, really. I think the only reason I saw it was because someone managed to spot it and just chuck it on Reddit just in time for
same.
me to spot it when I woke up in the morning. Tired, exhausted.
And that's the first thing you
depressed.
see. Yeah, it's not the best.
Are we talking about the news or waking up in the morning?
Yes. So, I do hope that, that they take the slightly more empathic line than Cass did. I hope for that, but given Levy has been recruited in the same way that Cass was, there was nobody else for in consideration for the role, and he's somebody who has he's stopped GPs and other NHS services from interacting with and taking prescriptions from private trans healthcare clinics. In his previous role, he has done that. That is an anti-trans move. Whether he meant that overtly, I don't know. Maybe it was just part of a wider clampdown on stuff that he thought was extraneous. Unsure. And until the library review actually comes out, we won't know. Because until it comes out, we don't know if it's going to be anti-trans or otherwise. So we should absolutely be agitating for including trans people on the people that you speak to, rather than talking over and around us.
No, exactly. I suppose the cast review, just having a clear indicator of us knowing it's not going to be good, there was sort of a sense of aura of what if it isn't so bad as we thought, like as if some kind of hopeless begging in our brains thinking maybe it won't be so bad. But now I think the whole community has cottoned on, and I think the Trans Healthcare Coalition have sort of also realised that we need to pay more defensively towards these kinds of reviews than we did before.
Yeah.
And of course the whole community knowing exactly how bad Cass was, getting some folks to check this out, say, listen to trans people, whether that works or not, because we've seen how consultations work, we'll have to see.
They ignore the evidence that's inconvenient to the previously established line.
But as we've seen with the consultation form, it's not going either way in terms of looking like it's anti-trans or pro-trans, and quite dry, so it's all a waiting game, really.
Yeah, well, a waiting game and writing letters to people game, as to the extent that you're able to do that. More on this as it develops, of course. This review will be ongoing for kind of the next few years, really, we think. It's not going to be one and done in the next few months. So if you are at all in need of any trans healthcare, get it now. Get yourself on the waiting list if you're not there already. I imagine there's quite a lot of our audience who are already on a waiting list. Yeah, scary times, I think. But hopefully we can positively influence the review in a way that we weren't able to with Cass, because now we're expecting it. We're kind of galvanized against the possibility that it might not be as independent as it claims to be.
I think we're all quite horrified with the Cass review, and I suppose there's been some horror from some cis people in the next story.
Yes, those poor cis people. So we actually think it was pretty impossible for a trans person in the UK to not hear about this story. Ewan Murray and Grace Bingham are a cis-het couple who've recently welcomed a newborn baby girl, and the reason we are reporting on this is because the new arrival was mistakenly registered as male on her birth certificate, and the couple have apparently now been informed that it can't be changed.
A boy or a girl? Now, I think it's a little early to start imposing roles on it, don't you?
After many nights of broken sleep with a newborn baby girl, the couple did not notice that the registrar had made an error on the sheet before the certificate was submitted into the system. Murray said, "We were horrified but assumed that as we saw the mistake just a few seconds after it had happened, correcting it would be an easy matter. But although the registrar apologised for her mistake, and the area manager also apologised, it turns out birth certificates can't be changed, although apparently a note can be made in the margins of the original document, but how often do people read over these documents in detail just looking for any notes or appendices, right?" So Bingham, the mother, did say this though. She said, "Even if people do notice the correction, they'll assume our daughter is transgender, which isn't an issue if that's what she wants to be when she's older, but it's not the case now. Lila might also not believe she was born a girl, but that there was a strange biological thing that went on when she was born. I just feel so guilty. I'm in tears all the time. I'm completely torn up over it." The parents have, of course, complained to the General Register Office, but they've been told that the mistake was their responsibility and cannot now be rectified. So, yeah, that kind of sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah, imagine that. Your birth certificate's wrong, and what's on there doesn't correspond with what your body actually is. And
yeah, what must that be like?
No, guys, no, it's nothing.
Tricky one to get your head around. How could we possibly empathise with someone whose birth certificate is incorrect? Yeah, but seriously, like, this does show, to an extent, like, if something is submitted and then can't be changed within seconds, kind of suggests it's a bit archaic. I feel if there's not a way to rectify these things quickly, if there's like a managerial override or something, you'd think that would be there for just in case mistakes like this are made, but apparently not.
Now the kids later on in life is going to have to go through the whole troubles of a gender recognition certificate or something.
Yeah.
The gender recognition board would be like, all right, so have you been to the gender identity clinic? Have you had the medical treatments? And it's like, no, they were already born that. And
somebody made a mistake. Yeah. Yeah, so they'll have to go through to the gender recognition panel, won't they? Or maybe not. I don't know.
It would be kind of handy if a kid turned out to be trans. Save a lot of effort there.
That would be helpful, wouldn't it? That would save everybody some time. But equally, statistically, it's not super likely. But I don't know. I mean, as we've been saying for quite a while on the podcast, we think the kids are all right. So the people who are babies right now, who are going to be coming to adulthood in 18 or 20 years, what views of ours will be considered archaic by them? Yeah,
because I always think, like, I feel like I'm pretty open-minded, pretty woke, as they call it. But in the next 20 years, what if I'm just completely outdated and I'll be some kind of, I'll be cancelled or something in a few years?
Just don't use social media to express opinions.
That's certainly an interesting task for me, using our social media. I will certainly say that.
Yes, indeed. So... well, honestly, good luck to the couple, and I hope they do find a way to get this rectified, if they have to go to court or whatever, but even saying that, that's going to be expensive, just over a mistake that somebody made. But I wish them the best, and them and their newborn, and I hope they can get some sleep.
Yeah, congrats on the new child, I suppose, is another bit. But speaking of gender recognition and making sure your birth certificate's all updated to the correct thing, next up is the new info coming in from Scotland. Firstly, a very brief bit on this, but on the Scottish Gender Recognition Act. The Scottish Secretary of State, Ian Murray, was asked by the Scottish Affairs Committee about whether there are plans to lift the Section 35 order that was put on for the reform of the Gender Recognition Act. That is the order given by the former UK government to block bringing in the Act. And this is what he had to say.
In terms of the previous government using it, I have said clearly we won't lift the Section 35 order that was put in place on that basis, and it's probably a question for the previous government in terms of whether or not they should have used it, but it's a political question for them, not a legal question for us.
What a depressing clip.
Yeah, Like, okay, fine. Again, like, heart goes out to trans people in Scotland who'd been quite hopeful because their government had done something really good with the GRR bill that was then blocked by Westminster, and they were told we're going to challenge that block, and then they didn't. So, and it was ruled that Westminster had acted lawfully in applying that block. It just so frustrating.
It's like that clip from Star Wars Rogue One where like we were this close from greatness.
We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close.
What a shame. What a bloody shame.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's not all from Scotland this week.
So, second up, we have an update on the situation with Chalmers GIC that we covered a little while ago. So, quick TLDR, Chalmers Gender Identity Clinic, one of the only 4 NHS clinics in the country, put a pause on surgery referrals for those between the ages of 18 to 24 in May, citing CAS, when they finally decided to inform patients about this in September. Well, good news being delivered to us not by Chalmers but by Kit Colliver for the group Resisting Transphobia in Education. Chalmers has now lifted that block, which apparently happened in mid-October. This is despite them saying that the block was indefinite, while the service's provisions were reviewed. But now there are no new updates on what changes, if any, are made, and it's been instantly popped back within a month of a couple patients who were told over the phone after explicitly asking about the block to their care. And then they went to Trans Safety Network and they got involved. Regardless of this change back, those months have been lost for trans people on the waiting lists and cannot be gotten back. Thankfully, though, their care is resuming. But we need to highlight the fact, as far as things seem on a surface, in part because they've been neglecting to inform patients in a reasonable and timely manner, that Chalmers simply put a block on a care with wafer-thin reasons that they knew they couldn't uphold if people found out, which we did. That's deeply sinister behaviour that shows we all know the reasons are entirely superfluous. The point is denial to care. They keep trying these sneaky things and then we keep finding out.
Yeah, they say, oh, well, they won't find out this time. It's like, we always do, for goodness sake. And it's not, as in not to say, oh, we found out, as in we at What the Trans found out with our superior deductive journalistic reasoning. That's not how it works. We, as in the public, the trans community, the news always comes out. There's always a leak or, someone's involved and gets a letter. Or in this case, someone gets their MSP involved who writes a letter and receives a response which kind of blows the whole thing.
I mean, why do they keep bothering at this point of just trying to hide it?
Why not just be honest, Like, if you're being honest about being a dick, no one's going to dislike you any less. People are going to dislike you more if you just try and hush it up and lie about it. But surely just say, yeah, well, we're putting a block on your care and we don't have to justify it. And it's not like you've got any choice but to wait. So, yeah, it's so annoying, isn't it? And, to be a trans person in Scotland must just have been this point a couple of years ago when things were like, oh, well, at least we're not in England. Things are really bad in England. And now things have degraded significantly. Particularly those at this GIC who've had their care blocked for no reason and not even been told about it.
There's like a whole thing I just saw this on the group chat a bit ago about where basically now John Swinney's gone and said that men cannot become pregnant, just completely erasing the existence of pregnant trans people.
Trans men.
And trans men and non-binary folk.
Yep. Well done, Swinney. So, yeah, there you go. That's party politics for you. They always betray you in the end. Because there aren't enough of us. And the turfs are louder.
Yeah, that saves me writing up that story for the next pod as well. The waste of time for is John Swinney now.
So, yeah, well, let's move on. Let's come back to England now. And you'll be delighted to hear this because we made it, gang. We have our first Christmas-related story of the year. Woo! Christmas noise sound effect.
It feels like Christmas!
So listeners of a certain age may remember Eternal, a girl group from the 90s consisting of Louise Redknapp, Kelly Bryant, and sisters Vernie and Easter Bennett. They had hits with Just a Step from Heaven and Stay. These days they find themselves invited to switch on the Christmas lights in Hereford, but not all Herefordians welcome this blast from the ever more distant past. The local LGBTQ+ group Queers and Beers pointed out that Vernie and Easter had refused to do an Eternal reunion tour that would have seen them perform at various Pride events around the country this year. And the reason they refused? Well, here's a quote from Simon Jones, who is the publicist for Louise Redknapp, another member of the band. A message was sent to the team putting together the Eternal reunion, stating that if it was to go ahead, neither Vernie nor Easter would perform at Pride shows or LGBTQ+ festivals, he said. This was because the duo felt that the gay community was being hijacked by the trans community and they do not support this. Louise is a huge supporter and ally of the LGBTQ+ community herself, and both she and Kelly told the duo they would not work with anyone who held these views, and as such the reunion as a four would not be going ahead. So Queers and Beers published an open letter on their social media saying that these issues need to be addressed and prevented, as aligning with hateful groups only sends a strong message. Richard Hancock, who's one of the organisers of Queers and Beers, said, "It's been 14 months since the articles," and what he's talking about there is the articles about Vernie and Easter in their comments. It's been 14 months since the articles have been around. If I had quotes like this attributed to me, I think I'd have clarified them pretty quickly if I didn't feel that way. So, and I think it's worth pointing out, Queers and Beers have actually been pretty reasonable, right? They haven't been demanding anything particularly of the sisters. They haven't been accusing them of being transphobic. They've just asked that the comments that the sisters have made be clarified, right?
Especially when they said about the hijacking of the gay community as well.
Yeah.
I'm a lot less diplomatic on things like that.
Just that, trans people have hijacked the gay community. Like, that's not how it works, Chief. Most members of the gay community stand with trans people. It's just the minority that don't are really loud and annoying.
No, really, I wouldn't be surprised if they're holding the LGB Alliance cards and whatever.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, the LGB Alliance got to them first.
No, maybe if they needed some kind of crickets, we know how to... I'm sure some folks would know where to get them.
Where to obtain some cricket. Yes, indeed.
Speaking of other losers, I suppose.
It's that time.
Yeah.
Losers Corner.
Losers Corner. So, our winners this week are anonymous, but the loser is infamous. Andrew Tate.
Now, the only water I drink is sparkling water, because sparkling water is for rich people.
Yes, that walking cesspit, the screaming cockroach facing human trafficking charges alongside many other crimes, had his farce of a university hacked.
If you ever meet a man who's afraid of sparkling water, know this: he's certainly afraid of combat.
According to the Daily Dot, around 325,000 email addresses of former members were found. Just under 800,000 usernames grabbed and over 200 public chats and just under 400 private chats were also taken. The cherry on top and a final nail for adding this story to the script was that whilst this was happening, the loser in question was streaming an episode of his show.
So if you're sitting there at a table and your friend won't drink sparkling water, he's not your friend.
And as a welcome hello to the people who considered this prick worth $50 a month, Jesus Christ, they filled the chat with not only gender flags and feminist iconography, they also spammed it with memes, a photoshopped picture of the predator in question with a big old butt and an AI picture of him draped in rainbows.
Anyone who drinks still water is excommunicated permanently. And for your safety, I strongly suggest you do the same.
They were also able to ban people, crash clients, and in general cause havoc. They've handed over the information to Have I Been Pwned and DDoS Secrets, which is a journalist collective to host the data in the interest of the public.
Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Yeah, definitely.
So I saw this and I thought it was hilarious because Andrew Tate, to nick a phrase from H Bomber Guy, like his career is just crashed down through the floor and is burrowing its way towards the earth core because of the sheer weight of all of the nails that have been hammered into it. Somehow he's still free and still charging people dolts $50 a month. If you've got a friend whose name is on that list, who's giving Andrew Tate $50 a month, go and slap that friend and ask them, what the fuck are you doing?
What the fuck are you doing? Why are you wasting 50 quid a fucking month? Sorry, I still can't get my head around a 50 quid a month.
I know. Well,
It's like
he's a scam artist.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
It's like a good set of groceries for that money. All the chocolate bars you could buy.
Yeah. I love that's where your mind just goes immediately to the ooh chocolate.
Yes.
But just Andrew Tate, man, he's just so hateable.
You should only drink water to begin with. Sparkling!
To the extent that with some of the stuff that he's said about, liking women in a certain way, I forget the exact details of it, but liking women like X way is gay. Like, so liking, fellas, is it gay to love women?
Fellas, is it gay to drink water? I mean, the male body is literally 70% water. You're literally deep-throating another man.
What? What the fuck are you talking about, you odious little creep?
And that's why it's just so much sweeter to see that fucker get hacked.
Delightful, wasn't it? The exquisite irony is not lost on me.
And I think Andrew Tate's sounded like he's heading to prison with those charges. But he's got another story about prisons as well.
Yes, we have. So in more document-related thanks, I hate it news, the government has updated their guidance regarding trans people and the prison system. Now, the headline news is that being a trans woman with a GRC doesn't necessarily mean you'll be placed in a women's prison. On page 5, we have this statement of intent for the document. This policy framework builds on the previous instruction in the following key respects, and the very first thing listed is this: adding the presumption that transgender women, including those with GRCs, with birth genitalia and or any sexual or violent offence conviction or current charge, should not be held in the women's estate, with exemptions recommended by a complex case board, CCB, being referred to HMPPS Director General Operations for consideration and the Secretary of State for Justice for a final decision. So it's just immediately saying straight off the bat that any trans woman who's been accused of a violent offence or has been convicted of one shouldn't be housed in the female estate. So that's kind of bad that's there just in black and white, that trans women, even with a gender recognition certificate, may not be placed in the women's estate. Indeed, this is hammered home a little further on page 8 in the outcomes section, quote, in allowing individuals to express the gender with which they identify, this does not oblige HMPPS to locate them accordingly. It is one of many factors that may influence such a decision. So those two quotes are repeated almost verbatim, really, in the requirements section, which starts off with, all individuals in our care must be allowed to express their gender identity, but immediately follows that up with, their presence does not oblige us to allocate them to a men's or women's prison or approved premises. Accordingly, it is one of many factors considered. So, gender identity preference? We're just a preference now? Thanks for that. I mean, disliking aubergines or loving Studio Ghibli movies, that's a preference, right? Being trans, a little bit more complicated. So what did you make of this?
It's literally discrimination and ignoring human rights, because a gender recognition certificate is not something you ignore. It's just horrid. Utterly horrid. And they, for some reason, don't think, oh yeah, it's still a risk for a trans woman to be stuck in a men's prison anyway, because they'll still be at risk.
Yeah, quite. I cannot overstate how difficult and risky it would be to hold a trans woman on the male prison estate, because as you say, that would absolutely submit her to more harm and risk than possibly any other prisoner. Certainly more than most other prisoners. Like, I don't want to play what if and guessing games and try and demand that trans women would be at the most risk, but you have to admit they would be at a lot of risk, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just, Fucking hell.
Bastards.
Bastards.
Anyway.
Onwards with the next one. Now, some news of the obvious. There's a new article out in the journal Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology written by Talon Wright, Gemma Lewis, Taylor Green, Ruth Pierce and Alexandra Pittman. It's talking about a study that looked at the mental health impacts of microaggressions on trans people. Now, I don't want to spoil things for you, but it turns out that when you're part of a marginalised community, constant microaggressions can have an impact on your mental health. Shocking stuff, I know. I'm now going to deliberately quote from another article by Dr. Pierce outlining the study and its findings, the link to which will be in the description, and it's well worth taking a few minutes to read it. Quote, Wright designed a study of 787 trans adults in the UK, asking questions both about participants' mental health and their experiences of microaggressions. When analysing the findings, we found out that experiencing more microaggressions was associated with worse mental health, including increased severity of depressive and anxiety symptoms and increased odds of lifetime self-harm, suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts. Ashleigh spoke to Dr. Talon Wright about the article, so let's play the tape. Just a trigger warning, just at the start of this next story, there's going to be mentions of suicide.
So my name is Talon. I am currently the postdoctoral research manager at Bipolar UK, but I did my PhD at the Division of Psychiatry at University College London. And my PhD was all about sort of microaggressions and their associations with mental health outcomes in the trans community. I kind of found myself wanting to do this study because I myself am trans and I have lived experience of both microaggressions as well as pretty bad mental health. So, you know, thinking depression, anxiety and suicidality, the whole gambit, as so many of us do. And especially, you know, having looked at, you know, part of my study was not just to look at microaggressions, but was to create a kind of data set looking at various other factors that may explain mental health distress. So things like loneliness, rumination, minority stressors, all kind of factored in. But my PhD was focused on the microaggressions aspect, and as that felt like the most novel, which is interesting because it is not necessarily something that is novel within lived experience. I think we all kind of generally understand what life is like for trans people in society, in the UK especially, and let alone microaggressions, but very much macro violences, you know, from government and from general institutions. But I was interested because I had worked in a pub at Wetherspoons for about 5 years. And it was pretty much every single day, it would be the same sort of microaggressions you might experience or might expect, you know, sort of like constant mispronouncing, denial of my identity, behavioral discomfort stuff. Like it was all just very much like just all the time. And I kind of thought to myself, you know, like, well, it makes me feel really bad, but like, what is this doing to me as a single event, but also kind of accumulatively across a span of time?
What in particular made you want to perform this study?
Primarily, the reason I do my research is from a lived experience perspective. It's from mostly, you know, kind of selfishly my own lived experience, but then also lived experience that I see out in the community and people, you know, friends, family that talk about these sorts of issues they're experiencing. I also noticed how, whilst it was very clear to me that people were experiencing microaggressions and quite regularly, and people kind of said that, you know, that it makes them feel terrible and awful. The actual like literature itself, there wasn't really much on it until, I mean, just before I published my piece, the one that we're talking about, someone else had just snuck in before me, which I was really happy to see because it essentially like lined up exactly kind of what I found too. So it was to kind of build that evidence base and say, you know, to policymakers, to say to, you know, people who are doing training or something along the sorts, it's like, you know, that those small things that people say and think mean nothing have quite a large impact on people, and it's worth bearing that in mind when interacting. And I think that we do this with many people. There are certain things you don't say and you shouldn't say, and people think, oh, it's no big deal, I might as well just say it because, you know, I'm thinking I'm just being honest, and it's like you're being honest, but it's having an impact on someone. So we need to know that. And so this is like kind of like one of the first times, one of the not the first time, but it's been applied with like an empirical lens. So important apparently to do, even though it's that sort of no S word Sherlock situation.
This is kind of the obvious one, but can you give us a brief outline of what you found?
Sure. So to no one's surprise, I think we found that microaggressions, using what is called the Gender Identity Microaggressions Scale, which was developed by Kevin Nadal, and it has 5 subscales. So these look at misuse of pronouns, behavioral discomfort from others, denial of societal transphobia, denial of gender identity, and I'm forgetting one of them, invasion of bodily privacy. That's the one. Invasion of bodily privacy. And so these kind of create a total scale. And so you can kind of sum up all these scores across, I think it ranges from like 0 to 80. And for every sort of like, for every microaggression experienced, there was an increase in depression scores using the patient health questionnaire, which is one that's used very religiously in GP services to assess for depression. And the same for the general anxiety disorder scale, generalized anxiety disorder scale, which again is also used in GPs to assess for anxiety. And then I used some very simple sort of suicidality questions, looking at suicidal ideation, that's suicidal thinking, and suicide attempt, as well as non-suicidal self-harm. So looking at that scale against all of those outcomes, all of them were associated. So more microaggressions, more depression, more anxiety, and more suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, and non-suicidal self-harm. But beyond that, we thought, that's a great finding. I mean, one of the things about doing research is that you have something really obviously very sad and very horrible happening, but you call it a great finding, and it's just in my head it's so funny to think that. So we found that, and then we looked at, but we said, is there something else going on here? What is the mechanism? What's the underpinning? What's actually happening here? So when I looked at for my PhD, the subscales particularly, I was wondering if specific microaggression experiences had associations with specific mental health outcomes, and they did. So behavioral discomfort being one of them was associated with depression, but not with the other mental health outcomes. And that was after what we call mutual adjustment for the other subscales. So that's regardless of the other subscales, they were taken into account. Behavioral discomfort came up top and was associated with depression. Similarly, denial of societal transphobia, that was associated with anxiety. Misuse of pronouns was associated with both non-suicidal self-harm and suicidal ideation. And then finally, denial of gender identity was associated with suicide attempt. So essentially, I think that with those ones, I think there's some sort of obviousness to it, maybe. I don't know, maybe it's from, like, again, that sort of lived experience perspective, someone misusing your pronouns. Yes, it could have been a mistake. It still hurts, and therefore we see these increases. Denying someone's gender identity feels like that sort of step further from a misuse, from what could be seen as an accidental misuse to something that feels very intentional. And if you're experiencing that across the board and you're feeling as though nobody is recognizing your gender identity, it only stands to reason as to why that might drive someone towards that particular event. Similarly, though, I mean, denial of societal transphobia I thought was interesting, but again, that sort of rung true to me, sort of anxiety, feeling like you don't want to be around other people, maybe you're worried about being around other people, or other people's reactions, and knowing that you are experiencing transphobia on a daily basis, but people telling you that, oh, transphobia doesn't exist, don't be silly. And well, I know it does, but everyone's telling me it doesn't, so what is the truth here? Like, that sort of gaslighting that sort of comes up. So that is the study in a nutshell. And the sort of recommendations really, I think, are we need to do some more research on this. I think the thing I really want to look into is that cumulative effect. So I've got a paper hopefully coming out, and that will be looking at the longitudinal aspect of this. So seeing whether or not microaggressions at one time point can predict mental health outcomes at a later time point. I have run some analysis on that, and yes, in a way it does. There's this sort of story coming out that there is some predictive power, I suppose, with microaggressions and depression, anxiety particularly. That I think will be very, very informative in terms of any sort of prevention that we want to do or interventions. I think that's where like a lot of conversation needs to be had, particularly with sort of lived experience at the forefront around kind of what sort of interventions would make sense and how can we intervene when it comes to microaggressions, because they, to me at least, they seem to happen so off the cuff and it's difficult to predict whether or not someone's going to enact one. So I think maybe that's another avenue of research, is to find out what kind of makes people microaggressive or can kind of have this something come out that's microaggressive and how we might be able to inform and educate and work against that. It's a lot of work to do, essentially.
As part of Ruth's article, she's got the cat detector meme as a kind of like, you know, as a finding. It's to any trans person, it's obvious. Don't want to speak for everybody, because I certainly myself have been on the receiving end of what seemed like very specific and targeted microaggressions. It didn't seem like initially you kind of want to give the benefit of the doubt, and as you've said, you know, you just kind of want to say, oh well, maybe it was a mistake, but then they keep making the same mistake after you keep trying to correct them, and that's definitely something a lot more deliberate, isn't it? You definitely have touched on this already, and don't want this to degrade into a tautology, but how surprising were the results?
Not surprising whatsoever. And I think I sort of going to quickly pick up on what you said there about that sort of, when it happens repetitively like that, and that's when, and I know that I've had this conversation with many people around, you know, the micro nature of microaggressions, and it's like it's not micro, like these things, especially when they're done so consciously and repetitively, it's like someone's making an effort. So I think that the sort of language around microaggressions kind of demeans and devalues their impact sometimes. I don't know if we need like an updated language on this, but I think that in terms of like the surprising nature of the findings, people have responded well to it. People I think who don't live life as trans, and like I think that surprises me more, that people find it surprising. And because as you said, like, you know, I think Ruth's, because Ruth was a co-author, and when she put up that meme, and I just kind of looking at it and being like, this is hilarious and it's so true. Like, it's just, I was like, to be honest, it's been my whole career up to this point. I'm doing research that I'm like, well, it's obvious, but to everyone else it's not obvious. And I don't know if that's kind of humbling or not. I don't know what the word is for it, but it kind of makes me think, humbling or terrifying, to be honest, if people don't think that there's a problem with it or find it surprising, because it's like, you are living under a rock if you think this is surprising. Like, wait until you see more stats, like, or wait until the qualitative work comes out. But I think people generally, I think we just need to keep building that evidence base so that we can stick to them, essentially. Like, I mean, something needs to change, something needs to happen, and I think that the more of us who are doing this work, the better. And hence why I was so excited to see the other person publishing a paper just before me. I was like, I'm not the first one now, but actually I'm really excited about this, because now my paper looks even better because it's like extra stuff. Yeah, so in terms of like how surprising, I don't think it is at all.
I think it's important to have like a body of evidence if you are trying to convince someone in power, maybe an authority, or, you know, your local MP, hint, hint, dear listeners, that there is a problem. If you've got some hard data to back it up, that's you know, properly been researched as you have here. So, final question. How do you think the trans community can best make use of these results?
I think that there's power in knowledge. So there's a power in kind of understanding maybe what could be contributing. I mean, so, you know, during this whole process, looking at the sort of numbers, the prevalence of mental health distress in the sample I had, which is about 1,000 trans people, it cuts down to about 790 after removing some missing data. But over 90% had been suicidal at some point, like something around about like, I think depression scores were in the moderate to moderate severe, even severe. So I think there's a power in knowing kind of what may be contributing to it. So it's something that, instead of internalizing a lot of the blame on oneself, which I know I've done in the past, thinking there's something wrong with me clearly because I'm feeling this way and everyone else is fine and I'm overreacting and this and that. To know that these things have an impact means that you can kind of replace the blame onto these social determinants, because we know they exist and we know they're having an impact. So I hope that at least when people read this, they at least feel sort of validated in that, I suppose, that actually what they're experiencing isn't a consequence of them, it's a consequence of society. I hope that if trans people take all this sort of work and bring it to those people in power, it feels like an impossible task, but I hope it eventually changes their minds on certain policies and bills they want to put through. You know, the things like bathroom policies, the idea around, I mean, that in itself is already, denying gender identity. It's a whole host of the microaggressions put into this sort of bill of macro violence. So like it's a difficult thing to do, but I think that would be my two, I think, main messages. I think definitely the first one, not to internalize all the crap and to realize that actually, yes, what people do has an impact on us and individually and collectively, but it's not your fault. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not your fault.
If you found that interesting, have a look at the study or the article on Ruth Pierce's website. The links are below.
Now, dear listener, cast your mind back to the misty, far-off days of 2017. Donald Trump was inaugurated in January for the first time. The Manchester Arena was bombed by a terrorist, and Britain triggered Article 50 to leave the European Union, a decision which has had no lasting consequences whatsoever and has led us all to the sunny utopia that Britain has become. Something else that happened in some time around 2017 was the Conservative government of the day began a research project designed to look at LGBTQ+ people's experiences of homelessness. Surprising, I know, but the anti-trans hate machine hadn't yet ramped up to the screaming pitch that it's reached today. Now, why haven't we heard of this already? Because even once the project was finished, they deliberately didn't publish the results until November of 2024. These results have been sat in a drawer or on a drive somewhere in the Government Equalities Office for maybe 4 or 5 years, depending on how long the actual research took to conduct. At the very top of the document, there's a sentence that goes, "Owing to delays in publication, the content and language of the report does not reflect current government policy or the latest available evidence." And that's it. Delays in publication. That's all we get. No reason for why this might be, no excuse given. They haven't even bothered to try and blame somebody else, which is like page 1 stuff in the How to Be a Conservative handbook. The report is, unfortunately, exactly what you might expect. LGBTQ+ people across the board have worse experiences of homelessness, with trans people in particular often singled out for the worst treatment. There are stories in the report including trans people being straight up denied access to shelters, and even one case where shelter workers admitted to having a blanket no trans policy, which is very illegal under the 2010 Equality Act. But homeless people tend not to be able to afford legal representation to go to court, so these shelters can get away with it. If you feel like having a predictably depressing half hour or so, give the document a read. It is, of course, linked in our description.
I think I saw it from Blue Sky on this occasion. It's always social media. You never see it on BBC, you don't get it on The Sun, The Guardian, anything like that. It's just whatever someone's managed to find, just quietly put out there. And this is like massively important to show the massive discrimination towards trans and LGBT people with homelessness, and a literal discrimination that in some cases with official charities is literally illegal, and that this needs to be pushed a lot further to whoever is possible. And it's also like a bit of a relic from the old 2017 days as well. It was even before this podcast came out.
So this podcast started in 2018, right? So this, basically, it looks like it was started sometime between 2016 and 2018. So let's just call it 2017 to split the difference. So it's then run for like a year or so. It looks like it's been finished sometime around 2020. And it's then just sat in a drawer since 2020 all the way up till this year, 2024. It's just infuriating. I didn't want to go through absolutely all the stats and statistics on the podcast because it's it's really fucking depressing. And this episode, with what we're going to be talking about in a bit, is going to be a heavy one already. I mean, they're all heavy ones these days, aren't they?
No, it's like a blooming...
Really?
Yes, always made out of lead in this big balloon of podcast episodes.
But yes, the actual document that the government have put out, if you can stomach reading a very densely packed and difficult document, please do have at it. And finally...
Yes, so I think every single person on the internet, and even on BBC News, something that did make it to BBC News, out of all these massively important topics, all this stuff... We've, you may have noticed the Supreme Court case going on with 4 Women Scotland. It's basically going over the gender recognition certificates and whether, if you've got a gender recognition certificate, it can say that you're a woman, as that's its job. And for some reason, 4 Women Scotland wants to say, no, it isn't its job, despite that being what it's meant to be.
That's literally its purpose in law.
But we're going to go into more details in the next episode, as we want to make a proper deep dive, and we didn't have time this episode.
And the case is, as we record this, the case is actually ongoing. Evidence is still being presented this week. So we want to have all our ducks in a row of, well, here's all the evidence that was presented by X party and Y.
Some cool people.
So more on that next time. Won't that be fun?
I think we're hungry for some more news and hungry for a bit of meat.
How can you make pudding if you don't eat your meat?
Delicious. Well, kind of. I mean, it's that time of year, isn't it? It's the difficult time of year for trans people because recently, of course, was Trans Day of Remembrance. If you listen to our American sister podcast, a list of the names of all 30-odd people who were killed in the USA were read out. We're not going to be doing that. We're not going to read any names out because it's really difficult to do. And I'm sure you don't want me to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes just reading out a list of 350 odd names, I think. But what we are going to do is we're going to talk about what TDOR means to us a little bit more generally. And then Alex is going to talk about something rather interesting.
It's a very sobering time, TDOR. It's where you sort of have to step back and really think about who we've lost, and such a sober time. I always make sure to dedicate an evening when I can to just sort of remember him. I try to make it to a vigil or something. Like this year I went to one the weekend before because there was one for from the trans strike back, which was very important, and it always immobilizes us.
Yeah, you kind of seize up, not quite knowing what to say. So I take what you mean about the solemnity of it. You kind of have to take space and do something. Like, there have been a couple of years where I've stayed in and just kind of done a bit of a TDOR observance on my own, just with a couple of candles and sitting and having a think and considering intentions for the coming year. I guess it's a little bit ritualistic. But I went to this year's TDOR event in Manchester, which I had to layer up pretty thoroughly because obviously sitting outside in the cold it was an hour and a half, beginning to end, because it says, it starts at 6:30, but really it kind of started at 7 o'clock. Everybody was just kind of gathering from 6:30. The thing is, there's a few people that I only ever see at big events, like Trans Day of Remembrance. So I see them at Pride as Sparkle, and I see them for Trans Day of Remembrance. So it's I see them in the lovely summertime and it's great and we're all cheerful and it's Pride and woo! And then I see them at TDOR and everybody's, wearing thick coats, usually darkly coloured, because it just kind of feels appropriate to wear black somehow.
Yeah, it's like a proper swinging metric of feelings between each of the events there.
Yeah, it is. So you said you went to a TDOR event. So what was that like?
Yeah, so it was sort of a day or two, on a weekend before the TDOR. It was sort of It was a group called Trans Strike Back, who did a vigil just outside of outside of the Tavistock Clinic. They held a 12-hour vigil from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the evening. It was originally meant to be a 24-hour, but there was some health situations that they had to halve the day. So there was some really important testimonials and people speaking to folk who attended the event. There was also some drag artists to help lighten the mood on occasions, and it was a very good event. It had its sober moments. I think lots of moments where it was just everyone was just silent for minutes after reflecting.
Like, it's difficult to know what to say, isn't it? Because, you know, there's only so much reflection and solemn consideration that you can really talk about without sounding like you're just sort of playing for time. So let's not spend too long on this, I think.
I suppose to move things on, at the vigil from Strike Back 2024, Trans Kids Deserve Better also attended the vigil, and they've also been doing something quite. They've been protesting again quite recently this week as well.
Yes, well, you were there, weren't you? So, okay, so tell us about the action. What was the plan?
Yes, so this action that happened, it was very secretive in how it was planned. We found out about it. Well, in fact, we were interviewing Trans Kids Deserve Better for their cricket action, I think in October. And just as the interview ended, they were like, and keep an eye out for us on the 27th of November as something with Wes Streeting's going to happen. And we were like, oh gosh, they've given us an interesting secret there.
Yes, indeed.
But Elena had to keep it secret. And we only found out like a couple hours before the event happened. I had to get myself to London to report on the bloody thing. But what happened at this event, which we finally found out, was there was two things that they were doing. The first one was they were going to do a die-in at Victoria Tube Station, right in the middle of everything. They had a banner drop on one of the balconies at Victoria Street Station, and there was also a person with a megaphone doing some speeches, basically informing the public of the situation with puberty blockers. And on that banner was, kids can't be kids if they're dead. Which was a very striking thing to put up, and it captured a lot of the attentions of people around. There was a lot of people looking around going, well, what's happening here? And then they heard they saw the trans flags on the bodies of the kids who were dying, who were in the die-in. There was the banner up there which said kids can't be kids if they're dead. They then swiftly moved on to Department of Health and Social Care building, which was just a few minutes down the road, and they placed a bunch of paper coffins on the front of the building to basically show what the effects of Wes Streeting's decision, as Wes Streeting is the head of the Department of Health and Social Care. When they were talking, the Trans Kids Deserve Better were talking about it in the group chats, they were saying it was going to be a very difficult protest for them emotionally.
I saw you as our intrepid investigative reporter on the spot, because obviously you knew about it ahead of time. I think that means that you were the only reporter there, like the one who got told about it beforehand. There's a certain amount of trust with that, so that's pretty cool. And well done on your kind of getting the news out there and using your phone and putting your camera to good use as ever. So nice work.
Thank you. Yeah, there was certainly a good deal of dual-wielding camera and phone at the same time.
Dual wield, yeah, these are my weapons. So that's some difficult stuff, but let's finish with some lighter stuff. let's talk about some trans joy.
Or dessert, I think. We sort of went for dessert and then we forgot to bring up the names.
Right, we just... Always how you do want a little bit of pudding. I thought you cheeky little wizard want a little bit of pudding.
Mm-hmm.
Coming through our inbox recently, we thought we'd signpost to a cool YouTube drama series about the lives, loves, losses and triumphs of transgender friends and family in a small island town. It's a YouTube series which seems like a really cool series, and we're going to link to the playlist of that in the description, so more trans stories and representation put to video.
And speaking of cool trans media, we also recently saw an awesome trans comic called Girl Mode by Magdalene Visaggio. We will link to Magdalene's Blue Sky in the description here. It's really cool. I mean, I kind of love my trans comic books. It's sort of the only comic books I will reliably enjoy. Like Safe Sex was amazing, and so check that out.
I don't really catch up on too many comic books. I think that's... to be fair, my parents never really gave me comic books to look at, even if it was Marvel or DC or whatever. I was neglected as a child, as it sounds like now.
Well, maybe you wouldn't go that far.
But speaking of cool trans comics, there's also a Kickstarter we're going to link in the description, made by a bunch of awesome trans artists, trans people of colour, also doing some cool writing and making of these comics, and a comic called Time Wars, a comic set in an endless conflict between humans and vampires. Sounds like the culture war, if anything.
It sounds like exactly my jam is what it sounds like. That sounds amazing. Let's do that. And since we've, this Trans Joy section is all about cool trans media that we've been showcasing, the last one is also a cool series. This time it's an audio drama that's both science fiction and a crime comedy. So there is a ton of trans and queer representation. It is well worth a listen. And it's called The Kingery, so definitely check that one out. We'll again share a link to the Blue Sky in our description.
Also, I've completely forgot to mention that our audio editor has had a bit of joy themselves.
Oh, they did, didn't they? Okay, so what's the details? Give me the tale, spin me the yarn.
Yes, so the yarn, or the tale of which is our fantastic audio editor Amber Devereaux, has won a award at the Audio Production Awards as the Best Sound Design Producer, which is just fucking amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can probably tell, Amber knows how to do some audio editing, right? You've probably noticed over the last few months the use of sound effects, a bit of music being dropped in here and there. That's Amber very much knows her craft. We are lucky to have her, and congratulations, Amber, for your win. That's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. And you can hear the good work of Amber right now by literally listening right now.
Humble five, you know it. I couldn't possibly.
On that, high, on that bit of good news, which we've got to take them where we can get them, that's it. That's us. That's where we're going to end our show. Thank you so much for listening. Wonderful to have you with us as always. You can find all of our work, including that article by Viridian that we talked about right at the start. You can find that on our website, whatthetrans.com. You can find us on Blue Sky. You can find us on Facebook. You can, if you're able to and you're so inclined, do feel free to check out our Patreon as well. We are so close to having 100 of them. It's amazing. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll speak to you next time, which will be our last episode before Christmas, and then we'll take a little break, but we'll talk about that next time.
Bye!
Goodbye. This episode of What the Trans was written and produced by Ashleigh, Alyx and Flint, and was presented by Ashleigh and Alyx. This was edited by the award-winning Amber Devereaux and Ollie Morris, Amber Roberts and Lowry, with music composed by Waritsara Yui Karlberg and our thumbnail image by Upoa Bears, with transcription performed by Sam Wyman, Rowan B., Rachel Aldred and Georgia Griffiths. We would especially like to thank our producer-level Patreons, who are the Socialist Party of Great British,
SBG EST 1904, Alyssa,
Sarah,
Alison Cole,
Eris,
Tin Roof,
Naystrom,
Danny Gould,
Lex Phoenix,
Sebastian Singh Soprano,
Joe the Low Quality Envy,
Andrea Brooks,
Jack Edwards,
Dulcie,
Stefan Blakemore,
Now Art,
Needles and Threads,
Flaming Daphne,
Dr. McGee,
Jen,
Rachel Harris,
Katie Reynolds,
Georgia Holden Burnett,
Grabalicious,
Mux Afon,
Root -1,
Gray,
Elizabeth Anderson,
Bernice Roust,
Ellen Meller,
Jay Hoskins,
Trowan,
Ashleigh,
Matty B,
Setcab,
Jane,
Roberto DePrunk,
Rose Absolute,
Sarah,
Cena,
Kiki T,
D,
Sky Kilane,
Eric Widman,
B,
Jude,
Monsieur Squirrel,
Fergus Evans,
Anubis Jackal,
Kamina,
Brandon Craig,
Break the System,
Sean Phillips,
Heidi Reardon,
Ezra,
Lenzel,
Clara Volumi,
Amelia,
Samantha Raven,
Ravenheart, bringer of heavy metal,
Tabitha Jo Cox, aka Candy,
Fiona McDonnell,
Murgatroyd,
ontologically unjust,
Stella,
Cindergoza.
Rebecca Prentice,
Oh, my parents are in the house. I can't do too crazy. Crazy Richard!
Dan Oblivion,
Florence Stanley,
Helen _
L. Hollingsworth,
Nick Ross,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
a mysterious anonymous patron.
Spooky.
C.B. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Ted Delphus,
Kai Lewin,
Vic Parsons,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Catherine,
Sabrina McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Karakan12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Penier,
Lauren O'Nions,
Bernard's Pig Jellybean,
Lanos.
and Chris Hubley. Thank you all
Thank
for
you
watching.
to you all.
Bye.